Alright, so this weekend The Flash released in theaters, and since this is a movie that deals with the multiverse and combines the different worlds of DC, it's time to rank all 42 theatrically released DC movies. Well, the ones that are rated PG-13 or lower, from worst to best. So the R-rated films like Joker, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, those aren't going to be on this list. The two exceptions to that rule being the extended cut of Batman vs. Superman and Zack Snyder's Justice League, since really, you take out the unnecessary F words, those are still PG-13. They're not super graphic. There's not a ton of nudity or anything. I would still say I'd still feel comfortable showing those to a 13-year-old. So those I included. But I'm also not including anything direct-to-video. There's literally hundreds of direct-to-video animated DC movies. If I did that, this video would be like 12 hours long. So with those rules out of the way, let's get started. And coming in at last place as the worst DC movie of all time is probably not the one you think. It's Catwoman. Yes, folks, this movie is worse than Batman and Robin, and probably some of the other ones you thought were going to be lower. The reason this movie is so low is that with the other DC movies, I can see how they at least try to have some semblance of who the characters are, but this movie is Catwoman in name only. It has absolutely nothing to do with the character, not even remotely. The character's name isn't Selena Kyle, and it doesn't take place in Gotham. The plot is a woman getting cat-themed superpowers from Egyptian cat gods and acting hilariously like a literal cat, and it feels like a bad sketch parody. What's also bizarre is its hypocritical message. It's trying to do a woman empowerment story, but the message at its core is still, your looks are all that matter, because the villain is an evil makeup company, and also the main character is also overly sexualized in every shot. What's most bizarre isn't the absolutely nonsense story or the choppy editing, it's the fact that this was pitched to a room with several people who all greenlit it, read the script, thought it was good enough to fund, filmed this movie, released it, and nobody at any point said, this movie might be a bad idea. The only good thing to come out of this movie was Halle Berry's Razzie acceptance speech because she at least had a good sense of humor about it.
I never in my life thought I would be up here winning a Razzie! I mean, it's not like I ever aspired to be here. But thank you.
I couldn't come up with a stupider movie if I tried. Ouch. Number 41, Superman Returns. As bad as some of the other Superman sequels were, they at least understood the character. As cheesy as they could get, they at least felt like there was some resemblance to the source material. Here we get a Superman who had a one-night stand with Lois Lane, then abandoned her for 5 years, and then when he comes back to Earth gets jealous she has a new boyfriend, and apparently got her pregnant out of wedlock, and that makes no sense at all. The idea of Superman is that he's a Boy Scout, the perfect man, an ideal to strive towards, someone mankind wants to be like but never could be. So Superman having a one-night stand with Lois and then becoming a deadbeat dad makes no sense. And the actress who plays Lois was 23 at the time, and Superman's son is 5, meaning she was barely 18. Ugh, what? The movie is also incredibly boring, with Superman throwing no punches or having any fight scenes in this movie at all. There's a pretty fun scene at the beginning of Superman saving a plane. That's it. That's the only good scene in the movie. This is just an absolutely awful story with terrible pacing and a character they just incredibly botched with the writing. Number 40, Superman 4. My expectations for this movie were low, but yikes. I don't care that the plot is fairly stupid and preachy. It's no more so than the comics or old Superman cartoons from the 40s. But the dialogue in this movie is incredibly atrocious with horrible effects. The fact that it came out in the 80s is not an excuse. There are plenty of other movies that came out around the time that have much better effects. This is just lazy. The other Superman movies weren't that good either, but they at least had some semblance of passion put into them. With those, you could tell they were at least trying to be competent. This is just pure stupidity all around. Number 39, Steel. A generic B movie that isn't even fun to watch. Someone at Warner Brothers said, you know who would make a great action star? Basketball athlete Shaquille O'Neal. I kind of get the idea behind that to some degree. I mean, Warner Brothers had success with casting Michael Jordan in Space Jam the previous year, but the reason Space Jam worked was because it was about basketball. Shaq is not a superhero or action star. The message is heavy-handed, the plot is incredibly stupid, and overall, it's very forgettable. It's awkward, it's poorly made, it's just an overly bad idea. I wouldn't mind its cheesiness if it were at least fun to watch, but it doesn't even have that going for it. Number 38, Batman and Robin. One of the biggest cinematic misfires of all time. I mean, I can kind of get what they were trying to do. They were trying to imitate the Adam West show, but its execution is so bad. While Arnold Schwarzenegger can give a fun performance as Mr. Freeze, the way they wrote him is not who the character is. Freeze in the comics and animated series is a tormented soul, but they made him an absolute cartoon. The tone of this movie is so terribly campy, and to this day, George Clooney regrets ever taking the role. Now, I can buy George Clooney as Bruce Wayne, he does a good job with that part, but not as Batman. You can tell there was a lot of studio interference. The movie was just made for the purpose of selling toys. They absolutely did not care about how the film turned out or the final product. They just did it to make money, and there was no passion or effort put into this at all. Number 37, Supergirl. Yeah, the movie's pretty campy, but it's no campier than the Christopher Reeves Superman movies that came out around the same time. It's not a good movie. It's not well acted, nor is it well made by any stretch of the imagination. I still had fun with it, though. The plot doesn't really feel like a comic book movie, though. It feels like a really bad fantasy B movie, and its performances are over the top, but they're also kind of fun to watch. But I'll say at the end of the day, this movie is still better than the later seasons of the Supergirl TV show from the CW. I'd rather watch that than a lot of those later seasons. Number 36, Jonah Hex. This has some cool ideas. It has a lot of style. Josh Brolin has great screen presence. Michael Fassbender makes for a fun villain. But the plot's very thin. The character development is very rushed. This is an 80-minute movie that probably should have been around a solid 2 hours. It was entertaining enough for what it was. At least I wasn't bored. It just has a lot of missed potential. The version of Jonah Hex from that one episode of Legends of Tomorrow was definitely done a lot better. Number 35, Wonder Woman 1984. I have ranted and raved to no degree about this movie because it makes absolutely zero sense and doesn't even follow its own rules. The villain has a wishing rock that can grant people wishes, but in order to do that, he has to be physically touching them. Yet later in the movie, he's able to grant people's wishes simply by broadcasting himself on TV. Kristen Wiig's motivations for becoming cheated are incredibly stupid, and what they do with Steve Trevor is angrily insulting. Diana wishes for Steve to come back, and it's very clearly established it's not really Steve, it's some other dude that she sees as Steve, so she basically mind-controlled the guy for a week because she was clingy, so you basically turned her into a villain. Wonder Woman's powers are also very unclear. In the first film, Batman vs. Superman and Justice League, she can't fly. She can merely jump long distances, but in this, she can fly like Superman. And if she can do that, why didn't she do that in those other movies that take place after this one? There's also a part where Steve and Diana go to the Museum of Jets, and this museum not only has fully fueled jets, Steve is also able to fly them despite the fact that A, he hasn't flown in 40 years, and B, this isn't even him. Again, it's some other guy. How does he know how to fly these things? It has some good action scenes. Chris Pine has fun in the movie, and it does have some fun leaning into the 1980s setting, but the plot is overstuffed, makes it up as it goes along, and doesn't even follow its own rules. And thank goodness the DCU is getting rebooted at the end of the year because I never want to have to talk about this movie ever again. Number 34, Superman 3. This is where the Superman movies kind of stop making sense. It still has a fun idea about Superman getting a split personality, and even though the villain's motivations are dumb, I'd argue they're no dumber than the previous two films. The effects are somehow worse than the previous two films, and the plot has no substance. It's just lazy, cheap gags, and it's very hard to watch. Number 33, Green Lantern. The only positive thing about this movie is this is where Ryan Reynolds met his wife. Other than that, it's trash. Ryan Reynolds gives a fun performance, but the story is dumb, it has rules that make no sense, and instead of making an actual costume for Ryan Reynolds to wear, for some reason they decided to make the suit completely CGI. The villain was also laughably overacted, but honestly, if we're comparing comic book movies about fighter pilots who get superpowers from an alien, it's still better than Captain Marvel, because unlike Brie Larson, Ryan Reynolds is at least charming and fun to watch. Number 32, DC League of Superpets. I guess if I were 8 years old, I would like this movie more, but really this should have just gone directly to HBO Max or something, because this just feels like a very long TV show pilot. It's like the executives at Warner Brothers said, hey, we need more family content on HBO Max, or I guess it's called Max now, but you get the idea. Let's make a movie about superpowered animals tied into characters from the Justice League. If it does well with kids, we'll make it into a show. It's harmless. I mean, it's not painful. I can't say I wasn't entertained. It's pretty average, though. It's nothing you haven't seen in other talking animal movies. Bolt, Underdog, Secret Life of Pets. Doesn't really do anything new with the idea. I mean, even though the plot is not that special, though, there are quite a few jokes that were pretty funny. This movie is actually pretty funny, and if you are a diehard DC fan, a lot of the jokes and references are deep cuts. Now, it's not smart as like a Batman or Teen Titans Go, but there was still some effort with some of the humor. But honestly, Keanu Reeves actually gives a really good performance as Batman, even though he was only in the movie for like 15 minutes, and the material they gave him to work with was pretty clever. As for the other performances, they're not terrible, but there weren't any where I thought, yeah, only they could have said this and made it work. All the actors in this movie are pretty interchangeable. I did enjoy Kate McKinnon as the villain pet. She was delightfully comic booky. She had a lot of fun with it. She was entertaining. The rules of the movie are pretty inconsistent, though, because, like, Superman can't understand his dog when his dog speaks to him. Yet it's heavily implied that the other Justice League members can understand their pets. And some of the pets they give them don't really make a lot of sense. Superman and Batman having dogs, okay, I can buy into that. Flash having a turtle, that's really funny. Wonder Woman having a pig, though, and Green Lantern having a squirrel? That makes no sense. Where did that come from? And then there were other jokes that were kind of lowbrow. There's, of course, the typical body humor you get in a lot of movies like this, and there's a running joke of one of the characters having a lot of their dialogue bleeped out, and there's no reason for this. It did not need to be as lowbrow as it was. It would have been perfectly fine without that lowbrow humor. Animal lovers and kids will appreciate it, but it really needed to have more effort put into it. Number 31 is Superman from 1978. I guess I can see why this is considered a classic. To my knowledge, the only other comic book movie at the time was Adam West's Batman. And yeah, I'll give the effects a pass because, hey, it's the 70s. I'm sure they did the best they could. Superman's flying effects actually still look pretty convincing. And Christopher Reeves, of course, delivers an iconic performance. That John Williams score is one of the most powerful in cinema. But the pacing for this movie is so unbelievably slow. Like Man of Steel, that's a very long-in-the-tooth movie too, mostly during the last act. But at least it didn't take 45 minutes for stuff to happen in that movie. I mean, Man of Steel opens with Krypton blowing up, and it's very exciting, and there's a lot of action going on. But nothing happens in this movie for 45 freaking minutes. The height of excitement in this film, in the first two acts, is Superman rescuing a cat from a tree. Lex's plan in this is to break the dam so he can charge everyone exorbitant prices. I mean, I guess that sort of fits the tone. It's no less silly than some of the Superman cartoons that came out a few years before this. And the Deus Ex Machina of Superman turning back time and flying backwards around the Earth is just so dumb. You'll believe a man can fly. Yes, those effects are convincing. But there's only so much belief we can suspend. Also, you know the movie's old because there's a part where a cop tries to sexually assault a woman, and it's played for laughs. Ugh, yeah, so this movie did not age well. And you also know it's old because the millionaire is actually able to go to jail. Now, this movie set the foundation for several ideas that would be done again much better in Man of Steel, though the film is not as heavy-handed with its religious allegory. Good for the time, I guess, but also shows how far we've come. Number 30, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Not a great movie, but it's also not completely awful. The concept of taking these public domain characters and forming a team of them does lend itself to some fun ideas, but the execution of it is kind of mixed. The plot is pretty thin, should have been far more interesting, but it delivers on the action pretty well. I'll admit, I had a bit of fun with this movie. The action was pretty well stylized, even if its effects aren't the best. The characters and actors work very well off each other, and they're all pretty likable. It can get pretty corny at times, but it also has a sense of fun and adventure, and even though the plot is riddled with issues, I think the action scenes and actors make it at least worth checking out. Number 29, Superman 2, the theatrical cut. A slight step up from its predecessor, particularly with its pacing, though it is still very dated and shows how much we've improved. The villains in this one are a tad more interesting, and you can see the influence of Man of Steel 30 years later. There's a lot of villains such as Zod and the other Kryptonians that were reused in that one, and also done much better. And I like the twist of Lois figuring out that Clark is Superman, even if in the end it really ends up leading to nothing. I like the theatrical cut just fine, but the Richard Donner cut is infinitely better, and I'll talk about that when I get to that part of the list. Number 28, Batman the Movie from 1966. This movie knows that it's camp. The film opens with a block of text saying, "This film is dedicated to lovers of fun," and yeah, I have a lot of fun with this movie. Unlike Batman and Robin, which tried to replicate this, everyone in this movie at least feels like they're in on the joke, they're giving their all. Now on a plot level, it's pretty all over the place. It feels like a few episodes of the show that have been edited together, so it does have a bit of a narrative flow issue, but I still get a ton of laughs from this movie whenever I watch it. Number 27, Batman Forever. A huge step down from Batman Returns. It's honestly hard to believe these movies are technically in the same universe. That being said, I still have fun with it. As over the top as Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones can be, they are at least fun to watch. My main issue with it really just comes down to the casting of Robin. Chris O'Donnell was in his mid-20s when he was cast, and while actors in their 20s playing younger characters can work, such as Tom Holland playing Spider-Man, Chris O'Donnell looks like he's in his 30s, so it's hard to buy into him as being in danger. It's got fun camp, but it's not a great movie. Number 26, Justice League, the theatrical cut. I liked this movie fine when it came out, but now that I've seen the Snyder cut, I see this as an incredibly inferior version of a much better movie. This now feels like a version of the movie that was hacked to pieces, because it was. Characters aren't given much development, particularly Cyborg, who doesn't affect the movie at all, and the pacing is way too fast because Warner Brothers, for some reason, mandated the film be no longer than exactly 2 hours. And the humor feels very awkwardly inserted. The villain's motivations are also completely left out for some reason. So, as a consequence, a lot that is left out was thankfully restored in the Snyder Cut, which is the much better version of this film. And speaking of movies that have vastly superior director's cuts, number 25, Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. This movie is very different than the theatrical version. This isn't just inserting a few deleted scenes. No, this is an entirely different movie in its own right, and it is much better. Superman is much more conflicted as a character, his relationship with Lois is much more fleshed out, the pacing is significantly better, and the plot makes a lot more sense. It honestly makes me wonder why they didn't just release this version in the first place. Number 24, Batman vs. Superman, the Ultimate Edition. I'm in the minority who thinks the theatrical cut is better, because unlike the Snyder cut or Richard Donner cut, the extra stuff here doesn't drastically change the movie, and if anything, it makes it more redundant. There's a new character in this version who basically just repeats information we already heard, and just feels like extra stuff added in for no reason. Number 23, Batman vs. Superman. I get I'm the only person who actually gave this movie a positive review. I acknowledge it is a bit overstuffed and it spends a lot of time trying to set up the Justice League movie, but the action scenes are so fun, even if the plot is a bit clunky and Jesse Eisenberg was miscast as Lex Luthor. You can tell there was a bit of studio meddling. This was originally announced as a direct-to-sequel to Man of Steel, then it was changed to be a crossover movie, and you can tell the script was rushed, but I still have a lot of fun with its action scenes. Number 22, Aquaman. Now, I think when this film was first announced, everyone was expecting it to be really stupid, but it ended up being kind of fun. The story is a bit paint by numbers, and the action scenes feel like underwater Lord of the Rings, and the villain is also super generic, but it's still pretty enjoyable. Number 21, Black Adam, which honestly is a bit of a misleading title, since the character Black Adam isn't really the focus of the film. The focus is on a group of heroes called the Justice Society, so a better title would have been Black Adam versus the Justice Society, or something like that. The action is well stylized, it feels very much like a Zack Snyder film. Dwayne Johnson is fun to watch in the film, the Justice Society work very well off each other, it's a fun comic book movie, and it delivers pretty much what it promises, so I can't fault it for that. Number 20, Batman Returns. This movie is well directed with great performances, but I'm not a fan of how dark and violent it can get. Tim Burton's previous Batman film still had his signature macabre style, but it also balanced it out with fun moments. But here, it's all doom and gloom. Penguin is an incredibly evil, vile villain, and yet the film still expects us to have sympathy for him at the end, which is a huge problem. Michelle Pfeiffer is great as Catwoman, she plays off of Michael Keaton very well, but it does cross the line for me with how dark and violent it gets. Number 19, Suicide Squad. I still have fun with this movie, though I do see the issues. Mainly, the first act is very rushed, characters don't get a lot of time to be developed. I'm fine with Jared Leto's performance as the Joker, I thought it was fun, but the story doesn't really have a lot of logic to it and it does feel very choppy. Number 18, Teen Titans Go to the Movies. I know a lot of people hate the show this is based on, so they didn't even bother watching this, but it's actually really funny. It's got extremely clever jokes focusing on the oversaturation of the comic book movie genre, a great comedic villain performance from Will Arnett, and pretty catchy songs. But this is definitely a movie where they put the jokes first and the story second. The plot feels like a much longer episode of the show and is very unfocused, but the humor is still very sharp, and I find it pretty entertaining. Number 17, Shazam! Fury of the Gods. This takes everything that worked about the first Shazam movie and expands it. Mostly. Story and villains in this one are a bit stronger, but on a character level, I don't think Billy's character development was as interesting, mainly because now that he's accepted his foster family and stopped obsessing over his birth family, there's not really anywhere to take his character. So the film's ending is also very Deus Ex Machina, but I still enjoyed it for what it was, though. I really enjoyed the Greek mythology aspect of it. I had fun with it, though. Number 16, Batman Mask of the Phantasm. A movie that, for its PG rating, is surprisingly dark and complex. The film looks at things like grief, revenge, loss, and presents it in a way that's just as deep as an episode of the show it's based on. It has a great mystery element to it with well-written characters, and the plot moves in some pretty surprising directions. It's not only a great animated movie, it's a great Batman movie. Number 15, Stardust. A fantastic fairy tale with great performances, humor, action, and a great, charming love story. The plot can feel a bit convoluted at times because there are so many antagonists to keep track of, and it can bounce from one plotline to another fairly quickly, but by the end it feels pretty coherent. The plot is fantastic, engaging, has great twists, and lovable characters. It's kind of like The Princess Bride, but not as self-aware, not as comedic, but it's still pretty heartwarming and charming. Number 14, Red 2. It's not as clever or fun as the first film, but it still tries. Neil McDonough is a fantastic villain, and let's be honest, Neil McDonough is fantastic in everything, and there are a few good twists, but on a plot level, it's pretty safe and it's somewhat cliche. And you can also greatly feel the absence of Morgan Freeman. The ensemble cast just isn't as entertaining this time around, though the action is pretty well stylized. Number 13, The Losers. A mixture of Suicide Squad and the A-Team, and it's fantastic. Great cast, great action, witty script, and great plot twists. The film is full of energy and is massively entertaining, even if on a character level it's not that strong. But it's just fun galore. Number 12, Red. A movie with a ridiculous premise that's also careful not to go too campy. Great cast, hilarious story, witty script, cheesy one-liners that are akin to films of the 80s. This is just kind of a fun turn-off-your-brain movie. Number 11, Man of Steel. Zack Snyder's take on Superman feels more grounded and unique. Certainly a very different type of Superman, but also a bit grimmer. For a movie that's supposed to be about hope, but has a lot of doom and gloom and an ending that's still controversial to this day. It's also very heavy-handed with its allegory and is about 45 minutes longer than it needs to be, but it's still a very well-made film that I think is pretty bold. Before I get to the top 10, share your ranking. This list is just my opinion. I'd love to see your list, and you can include the R-rated stuff on your list if you want to. That's just my rule, but I'm not going to fault you for putting that. You can put whatever DC movies you want in the comments, and you can even include the animated ones if you want. If you want to include the hundreds of direct-to-video animated ones, feel free to do that. That's your list. If you want to be that ambitious, be my guest. Number 10, Wonder Woman. This movie is absolutely fantastic with a lot of great action and humor. The story has a fun spy feel to it. The action and score are amazing. Really, my only problem with it is the villain is pretty miscast. I don't know what they were thinking getting Professor Lupin from Harry Potter to play Ares, the god of war. But that's really my only issue with it. I still think this is a very well-made, fun block movie. Number 19, The Flash. Now, if we're comparing movies whose plot involves a character with superpowers who dresses in red and tries to use time travel to bring their family back, they do this a lot better than they do in Multiverse of Madness. This is one of the few times that DC did something better. If you've seen my recent MCU rankings, you know I'm not fond of Multiverse of Madness. I found it very dark and unnecessarily occult. This film takes some of those ideas, but the way it's presented in this film is much more upbeat, and I feel the character development is a bit stronger. Right from the opening scene, the film is engaging, and much like the main character, The Flash, doesn't slow down. It's got fantastic action, a terrific plot, and a great cast. Michael Keaton, of course, returns to the role of Batman after over 30 years, and it's like he never left. His return to the Cape of Cowl feels very natural, and what they do with this character in this film feels like a very fitting continuation. There's also fan service galore while not distracting from the main plot. Now, a few issues are, though, with the plot level. It is a time travel movie, so you get a lot of the time travel movie cliches, dialogue about fixed points in time, how messing with time screws things up, how timelines work. It all feels very derivative of Doctor Who, Avengers Endgame, stuff like that. There's also a few scenes in the new timeline that Barry creates that feel like they were taken directly from the movie Last Action Hero. But honestly, the film is a lot of fun. It manages to be nostalgic while not being distracting. It's a ton of fun with its action scenes. It's got heart. It's got great characters. It's everything you want in a movie like this. It's very much a love letter to the DC fans, and it was amazing. Number 8, Shazam. An absolute blast with a lovable main character in a film with a lot of heart. Billy's a very relatable character, searching for a family and learning how to use his powers to protect them. It's got a few tone issues, mainly how dark it can get, which is a stark contrast to the overall lighter tone of the rest of the film. But it still has strong emotion, strong characters, and a fantastic message with a heartwarming ending. Number 7, Batman from 1989. Considering this came out at a time when we didn't really know how to make comic book movies yet, it's practically a miracle that this movie turned out as good as it did. It mixes the tone of the campy Adam West show with Burton's signature twisted style very well. Jack Nicholson steals the show as Joker. Michael Keaton gives an iconic performance as Batman, and it balances the tone of campy and serious just right. This is one of the few comic book movies from the pre-MCU and Christopher Nolan era that still holds up for me. Number 6, Dark Knight Rises. The weakest and most convoluted of the trilogy, but still a pretty dang great movie. Brings closure to all the ideas established in the previous films. Tom Hardy is fantastic as Bane. Anne Hathaway was a great choice for Catwoman. But there are some things about the story that feel like they're making up as they go, such as introducing Talia at the last second. Like, that just comes out of nowhere. Also, Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing Robin. Okay. Thank goodness that never continued. It is a bit overly long, but it's still fantastic. Number 5, Lego Batman. An absolutely hilarious and sharp movie that's accessible even if you haven't seen any Batman movies, though you'll certainly get more out of it if you have. Phil Lord and Chris Miller provide a ton of fun and a ton of laughs, while also giving the film a lot of heart. The film is absolutely bonkers in the best way. It's a laugh a minute, it's quick, it's sharp, it's witty, it's self-aware, and it is an absolute blast. It's one of the most quotable movies, and it gets better every time you watch it. Number 4, Zack Snyder's Justice League. The definitive version of the film where characters such as Cyborg get actual character development. The villain's motivations make a lot more sense, the score is a lot better, there's no distractingly misplaced humor, and the film takes the time to flesh out the overall story and world building, therefore making it far more interesting. And there's also a ton of lore for the diehard DC geeks. However, the reason the movie is 4 hours long is because Zack Snyder loves his slow-mo. If you watch this movie at normal speed, it would be a more manageable length of about 2.5 to 3 hours. I get it's a style, but dude, way too much style. Way too much slow-mo. Number 3, Batman Begins. One of the best comic book movie origin stories ever. How it addresses the themes of fear is written fantastically. Batman's origin story is written in a fun new way in a much more grounded universe, and Liam Neeson is a great villain. Number 2, The Dark Knight. Of course, Heath Ledger as Joker is one of the best villain performances of any movie, comic book or otherwise. It's got great themes of how society affects people, how even in a crazy world, people are still good and willing to fight against common evil, and it provides a lot of tragedy in the character of Two-Face. However, I do think the way it's done in Dark Knight is a bit sudden, especially compared to the way it's done in the animated series, where they give a lot more time with Harvey Dent to explore his downfall. Here it feels a little bit shoehorned in and somewhat hard to buy into, and the plot can have a bit of a narrative flow issue at points with a few plot holes if you really dive deep into it. And the number 1 best DC movie is The Batman. Unlike the other films on this list, Batman or otherwise, this isn't really an action-focused film. There's still action, and it's very well done, but at its core, it's a detective noir film. The majority of the movie is Batman trying to figure out how all these crimes are connected. And if you like the Batman Arkham games and you enjoyed the parts of those games where you were playing the detective side of Batman, that's what this movie is for the majority. Robert Pattinson gives the performance of his career here. He is absolutely amazing as Bruce Wayne, and I think making him a much younger character who is still new to being Batman made the film a lot stronger. Paul Dano gives an absolute chilly performance as Riddler, who, unlike every other version, isn't this cartoon. He feels like a real-life serial killer who could be anyone, which makes him incredibly scary. The plot is engaging, the action is exciting, it's incredibly well-written, well-crafted, and well-directed, and in my opinion, is the greatest DC movie ever made. So it comes in at number 1. So go ahead and share your ranking of the DC movies if you're up to the challenge, and I will see you next time.